we'll put them into some sort of context. So, just to get started, Giffnock. There's a bit of a debate as to when it actually came about or when it was first seen as being a place. But I've plumped for what a lot of other people do, which is in 1654, when it was first mentioned on a map. And you maybe see from this map what was around at the time. Basically, agricultural land outside Glasgow. Not much happening in Glasgow, but well, there was, because obviously the 15th century Glasgow University was established, 1451, I think, something around about that time. And you can see that Giffnock's not on any of these, isn't mentioned anywhere there. Braid Bar, Orchard, Williamwood, Birkinshaw. Come back to some of these names in a minute. But this is from 1654. And if you look in the top right-hand corner, where my little arrow's pointing, oh, back again, you'll see the name Giffnock or Giffnock beside Eastwood and other places like that, Aldhouse, Spears Bridge down here, Davyland, names that you'll probably all know. So really, in the early sort of, by about 1265, there was an Eastwood castle, but there was a lot of agricultural land around here, obviously, and religious oversight was by Paisley. But then in 1654, which is the date I'm mentioning, there was the first sort of mention of Giffnock as a settlement. And there are other mentions of local landmarks such as Rock End or Rooken Mill, which eventually becomes Rooken Glen. And it's mentioned in 1530 when James V presents surrounding land to the Earl of Eglinton. A lot of local names there. Now, Giffnock then develops over the next few centuries to the sort of thing that we're familiar with. And this is when it starts to take off. This is a later map. Just give you these maps to show a bit of context here. But this is essentially Fenwick Road, and at the top part of the map here, where I'm putting my little pointer, is where you would find Lidl's supermarket today. But this is the courthouse up here, and this is the main road going along here. And if Anne Craig was here, this is where Anne Craig lives. And then we get to what we're much more familiar with in terms of a map of Giffnock. This is about 1938. And you can see Eastwood Park down here, Eastwood Hill, Giffnock here. We have Church Road, Orchard Hill Church here, Giffnock School here, and of course the quarries, Orchard Quarry, Braid Bar Quarry over here around beyond Huntley Park. So to get back to where we started, basically this land was known for its agriculture, and this is the sort of scene we would have expected in the 17 and 1800s. Farms, Orchard Farm. We think this is a picture of Orchard Farm, which would be down Orchard Drive. But the thing that really made Giffnock Giffnock was the fact that there was a lot of mining going on in Giffnock, and particularly for sandstone and for coal, and it's famous for its quarries. So essentially, the reason that Giffnock started to take off industrially was the fact that the mining in the late 19th century started to take off. Remember, of course, by this time, Glasgow is the second city in the British Empire. So sort of 1850 onwards, up to 1850 to 1900. And the demand for raw materials is massive. So this is a picture of one of the Giffnock quarries, and you can see the stone here being chiseled out. One of the things I wasn't aware of is that Giffnock sandstone is the blonde sandstone. So when you see houses in Giffnock built out of sandstone, the blonde sandstone is the sandstone that Giffnock became famous for, and it was sent all around the world, including places like Australia, city chambers, all sorts of places, and was highly desirable. And of course, a lot of the houses around here are built out of sandstone. But there's also the red sandstone, and I think when I was growing up, thought that that was quarried here, but it wasn't. It was quarried elsewhere, particularly in Frisia, Ayrshire, and other parts of the world. So, first of all, the miners, people who were working, started to travel to Giffnock to work here. Coal miners, miners of all sorts. And in order to facilitate that, they built a railway stop between Glasgow and Busby, because Busby is older than Giffnock, because it's had textile industry in Busby. And the railway line was built between Glasgow and Busby as a sort of halt stop for the mines. And get my dates right, I think it was, what date was the railway built? Come back to that in a minute. I had it written down somewhere. And clearly the railway changed Giffnock entirely. And this is an early picture looking from roughly where Penrith Avenue is. Hilary will know this view quite well if it wasn't for the trees. But you can see Giffnock Station down here. And this is the road that comes down, Station Road down here where my pointer is. And this essentially is where Andy Ammo's and the Clydesdale Bank is. And this building here is where the Royal Bank is. And this is where the ophthalmic, or the place is. And this is, of course, looking up to Orchard Drive, up to the hills beyond. And of course, that would have been the site originally of what Giffnock was like. All this agricultural land up here, in the area that we would know as Wood Farm and over to Thornley Bank. And you can see that from this early picture that there's the road going through Giffnock and some grand houses, and of course the train station. But as it's really a train stop. This is an early picture of the horse and cart that was at the station in the early 1900s, basically to pick up travellers who are going to Mearns, which again is an older settlement, 3 miles up the road. And clearly the travellers would come along, get the train to Giffnock, and then they would jump on this and be taken up to Newton Mearns by horse and carts. And at this point, there were it was the embryonic start of Giffnock. So really we're talking about 1890s to 1905, 1910. All this new activity around the fact that there was a lot of industry going on in Giffnock. And wealthy merchants started to build houses here, as they did around the whole of Glasgow. That's a much more modern picture, but that was the station master's house at the station. We'll come back to that later. But in the early days, what you have here is the settlements growing up in Giffnock along what we now call Fenwick Road, but it's had several incarnations as a name. We call the Kilmarnock Road, the main road, and Fenwick Road. So sometimes people use them simultaneously or interchangeably. And if you can see on the right-hand side, this is Orchard Hill Church being built. Now Orchard Hill opened in 1900. So this is at just its early stages. And you'll see that I think Robin will be able to tell us more than anyone else. That looks like sort of Robin's house over there, but there are two houses still there on Church Road, these two that I'm pointing out. I don't know whether they're the exact same houses, but you'll see that the houses that you'd expect further along the main road here, those in Florence Drive, etc., don't exist at this point. And Church Road would be over here somewhere, coming down from the church along this way. The church has gone through, as Willie will tell you, 3 iterations. It was built in 1900 and then was extended in 1910 and then again later. The original church was just this building here, and then the bit that we now call, I think it's called the South Transept, the bit where you would have coffee and the church hall and what was the church officer's house was then built in 1910 as an extension. And interestingly, the third extension was then the bit that's over at the Rosslea side. Come back to that. And the pulpit was on the opposite side. And basically behind where the minister would be there was no, you had to wait to the third iteration of the building before that was built. But the church obviously was a really important part of the community. And if it wasn't for William Mann, who was one of the founders, it probably would never have got off the ground, because it started off in the golf clubhouse in Orchard Drive. And we'll come to that in a minute. And it was through his vision. He did a lot around here, but one of the things he did was to help the building of Orchard Hill. But I haven't really got time to talk about that in great detail. Now, later on, apart from Orchard Hill, Giffnock South was built, but it's much later, and about 20 years later. And I'm going to come back to this sort of picture later on, but basically Giffnock's sprouting 2 communities, one around Orchard Hill and later on around Giffnock South. And you can see in this picture, for example, what was before Eastwood Toll was exited. The main road is following up straight through here. Following up here, that was the main road up to Ayr before Eastwood Toll was built. This is a much later picture, but you can see, for example, Reed's tea rooms here. Now, I remember in the 1950s when I was primary school at Giffnock taking my brother there for lunch once, when I think I was in primary 7 or whatever, during our lunch time, because my mother was away, into this tea room. So I almost doubted that existed at one point, but it obviously does. Now, there's the original building of Orchard Hill. You'll see that it doesn't have this extra bit I just showed you in the diagram. So that was the original church. Now, just going back again, Eastwood Toll was basically the intersection between the road that went from Paisley to Busby and the road from Glasgow up to Newton Mearns and south to Prestwick and Ayrshire. And it was a toll road originally. And this building here, which is basically now the Turban Tandoori, was called Nellie's Toll, because Nellie was the toll mistress who took the tolls, and this was the toll booth, if you like, for the horses and carts going up that road. One of the big things was the building of these huge mansions that were sprouting up before, obviously, it became a populated place. And this is the house that was sitting in the middle of Rook and Glen, Birkinshaw House, as it was called in one of its iterations. Now, it was owned by Thomas Crum, who owned the print works at Thornley Bank, and was later, hold on, get this right. I've lost all my notes here. It was eventually pulled down, and if you go to Rook and Glen today, you'll find no site of it at all. It was what's left of the mansion there is, of course, what is now the Courtyard Indian Restaurant, which later became tea rooms. But there were large grand houses around Giffnock in the early 1900s, and this was certainly one of them. Another one is the Redhurst, and this is an old picture of the Redhurst, and it's obviously now a hotel beside Giffnock Bowling and Tennis Club, and it's one of the oldest houses as well that was built in Giffnock. And I think these are stables at the back, and there was a cottage called Inglenook, and which I think was to the right hand side. And if you go past the Redhurst today, you'll find that there is a little sort of modern cottage, and people seem to think that modern cottage used to be the site of this cottage called Inglenook, and it has got a significance which we'll come to as well later. This is an old picture of the sort of gatehouse at Eastwood Park as it is now, which was Lord Weir's estate. And this is taken from what is now the Hollows flats, and the road would go past there. Obviously, some of the other large houses would include Rowallan House, and in the middle of Eastwood Park. And Mains Estate obviously had a Mains house, and it was an estate. And if you go to Mains Estate today, you'll find a large block of flats in the middle of Mains Estate where we believe that the main house was. And then there was this other house which is called Old Mains. And if you go there actually today, because I was round there the other day, you'll actually find that house still exists. Old Mains. There's a picture in Anna Blair's book about Mains Farmhouse, which looks a bigger building. But there's an interesting connection here because Mains House was where Don Davidson of Orchard Hill Church was actually brought up. Didn't realise he was born in Mains House. So according to the book, he was born in Mains House, and I'm not sure that was the old manor house or the one that's still there today that looks a bit like this. Then, of course, you've got large buildings like Eastwood Hill, which have gone through a number of iterations, and it's now derelict, having been an eventide home for older people in the last sort of few decades. And it was going to be made into new flats, but the planning application fell through and it's now boarded up. But let's go back to some of the history of this. This is evidently a picture of what it looked like when Birkinshaw House was in Rooken Glen, and what you have is some picture, but to me it doesn't, I'm not sure about this one, because to me that doesn't look the way I imagine Birkinshaw House to look. So although it says it on my notes of the picture I was given, I've got my doubts about that one. Other houses, of course, include Roallan House, which is obviously on the main road, and again has gone through several different experiences in its lifetime, having been a private mansion to being taken over after during the Second World War, basically at the end of the Second World War, by the council to become both a library and an area for health services, before then being sold by East Renfrewshire Council, I think it was, not so long ago, and now flats. This is a picture, I believe, of the farmhouses that were up at the back of Giffnock North, up in the old area of the Quarries, where Peter Keenan once wanted to develop the land. And these were the sort of old cottages that, as a youngster, I used to play around when we were playing in the quarries, which of course we shouldn't have been. But all these quarries existed, and a whole lot of the old farm buildings were still there. And this was one of them. Another famous building in Giffnock, of course, was the Orchard Park Hotel as it is now, but it was just Orchard, the Orchard House. It was a grand building again, and basically the building of central part of farmland, or the Orchard farmlands. And the Orchard Park Hotel in the 1950s, when I was born in the Orchard Park Hotel, because it was a nursing home at that point. Gordon Brown was born there a year or so later as well, the ex-Prime Minister, Labour Prime Minister. But as you all know, it's a hotel now and has been for many years. But we're going back again to what actually happened in the early 1900s. And one of the things that actually happened was that when people started to settle in numbers in Giffnock, because the train had allowed them to do so, it was no longer just the gentry that were settling in Giffnock, and they obviously needed leisure activities. And this had an early picture of Eastwood Golf Club, which was established in Orchard Drive, because if you can imagine, everything on that side of Fenwick Road, the Orchard side of Fenwick Road, was simply farmland or quarry land. And these golf clubs date back to about 1895, 1900. All the activities do. The bowling club was 1895, bowling and tennis club. So people were looking for leisure activities, and golf was one of these early activities. And this clubhouse is evidently roughly where the Park Church is today, or the Abbeyfield nursing home, they think. That's an earlier version when they had just a shack. There's an interesting story about when they set the golf club up, that they had a large number of members initially, and then they found that they were storing explosives nearby. So some of the members didn't fancy it very much, so they went away and set up Pollock Golf Club because they thought it'd be safer there. And here's another early picture of Eastwood Golf Club, looking back at just what is farmland and blighted land for quarrying. In the early days, obviously, when people were living in Giffnock, social activities were very important. And this is one of these gala days, fete days, that again is meant to be in Giffnock somewhere. I can't place where it is, but I'm assured by David Blair it's Giffnock somewhere. There we have another example of what they get up to. Fancy dress, flowers, fancy hats. And of course, Rook and Glen at that time was becoming a magnet for people from Glasgow. They started laying the tram lines to as far as Rook and Glen, and people would come to Rook and Glen on days out in the early 1900s. And it was beautiful then, it's beautiful now, but it was a popular destination for people to bring picnics and have fun. And they'd come on the tram, and we showed you Nellie's Toll earlier, at Eastwood Toll, which is here. And you can see the tram coming from Glasgow, and the tram lines then turning round, heading down towards Spears Bridge to Rook and Glen, where the people would get off and enjoy a day at Rook and Glen. This large building here might well be the building that housed Bupa, or it still exists, that house. I'm not sure whether it's the same one, but it's certainly similar. Or it might just be the one that is now the, no, it can't be the nursing home. Anyway, you can see the size of these buildings. This is a little bit later, and you can see that it's changed a bit. That large building is still there. There's buses this time and older cars, and you can see the row of shops here. It's Fenwick Place and the large Victorian mansions further up the road. And this is it again. This is Fenwick Place again. And you can see the names of the shops there. So it's James Davy and Sons. And it says, I can't really make it station or something else. And again, there's the 273 tram. Now, we mentioned the Redhurst earlier on, and in relation to Inglenuke and talking about education, the rather formidable lady in the middle of this was the first real teacher in Giffnock. And if I can find the information, she set up a small class in the late 1890s, early 20th century in Inglenuke, which was this part of the Redhurst house. And Inglenuke became basically that first school. So her name was Miss Gardner, and it was called the Little Dame School at Inglenuke, which was as I say, the lodge of the Redhurst. And then they decided that a council school should open, and the council school was opened in our very own tower rooms at Orchard Hill Church. And here you see the expansion of the class, and you can see Orchard Hill Church in the background here. And this was them expanding the education for the ever-growing number of kids that were coming into Giffnock. And the school was held in the two rooms in the tower, and Lindsay Barr has been working very well to try to recreate that in the tower rooms. We've been held back obviously by COVID, but the Giffnock Primary School have been up to have a look at it, and they're creating sort of a memory of what happened there. As the roll rose, there wasn't enough space in the tower, and they built what was called the Tin Academy down Academy Road. It was corrugated iron huts. Don't have a picture of that, but for a few years they had corrugated iron huts, and then eventually in 1911 they built the stone building that you can see behind you there. This is obviously not 1911, but that was just tin huts after they had been at Orchard Hill. And then they put this rather grand stone building, which still exists obviously today, which is my primary school, my wife's primary school, and my daughter's primary school. But to go back to what everyone else was doing, what the adults were doing, the adults, when they came to Giffnock, were doing what we probably all do as well, which is to try and find things to enjoy. And one of the first things that they decided they would enjoy would be bowling and tennis. And I've been a member of Giffnock Tennis Club since I've been 11. I was 11. And recently I joined the bowling club. And they said, well, that's a good time to join because 2020 is our 125th anniversary of the Bowling and Tennis Club. And indeed it is. And they had lots of grand plans for this year, but like everything else, they had to be cancelled. But this is a picture of the grand opening of the bowling clubhouse as it was. There wasn't a tennis clubhouse in these days, in 1895. And some later pictures of the bowlers, and you'll see in the background, I think these are the houses in Broomley. And that's looking back again towards where the Retters would have been. That was what it looked like in the very early days. You'll see some tennis rackets there as well. When I joined the tennis club in about the early 1960s, we still shared the bowling clubhouse with the bowlers. And it wasn't until after that that the tennis club built their own clubhouse. Tennis was always a bit for the younger people and bowling for the older people. This is another picture of a fun day, and I'm not quite sure what that is in Giffnock, but it looks as if it's near some sort of the tennis courts as was, or the bowling club. Difficult to tell. But that's definitely the bowling club. Had a veranda at the front. It's changed a wee bit now, but originally it's basically similar to what it was in 1895. Curling was another sport. I've talked to Willie about this. I'm not sure whether this was Rook and Glen or not, but they certainly curled in Rook and Glen at some times. There's no visible landmarks there that I can identify, but clearly curling was a popular sport. Whether it's happened in Rook and Glen or not, I know it has happened in Rook and Glen, but I'm not 100% sure whether this is actually Rook and Glen. To go back to Giffnock though, industry and commercial activity was growing in Giffnock, and a lot of activity started to take place along Kilmarnock Road. Now, I've seen this sort of picture before on the internet or on Facebook occasionally, and people arguing where it might be. My understanding is that this actually is looking down Fenwick Road towards Eastwood Toll, towards Rowland House. And according to Anna Blair's book, where this guy, the horse and cart is actually passing what is now, or was now, the Clydesdale Bank and Andy Amwas, basically. And that down here is the road to Orchard Park. And this road, Kilmarnock Road, was widened on several occasions, I think on 3 occasions. So it changes its look. But here we have both horse and cart, and I can't see it around my side because it's blocked by your faces, but I think it's a bus. Or is it a tram? But as we move forward, as we get into the 40s, 50s and 60s, you'll see it now looking much more the way you understand Giffnock. And you'll see that the traffic is light, but what we have here is telegraph poles, the lighting, the shops with the canopies, and what we would recognise as Giffnock, going through Giffnock, and where Quick Fit would be right now, and then the Royal Bank of Scotland over here, and then this row of shops here. It includes beverages, includes Tony's Pizzeria, and then over here on the left, the row of shops before you get to Andy Ammo's about here. This is one of my favourite pictures because it's looking the other way to what is now Lidl's, was Whole Foods, and it's the Tudor Cinema. The Tudor Cinema was built in 1936 and it closed in 1961. And I was born in 1950, and I remember going to see Sink the Bismarck, and I checked what date it was out of. It was 1960, so I was right. I went there with my pals to see Sink the Bismarck and the Tudor, and some guys up the back were setting off bangers, as it was, just to get the experience, and we got thrown out. And I lost my wallet, and I said to the usherette, or whoever she was, I've lost my wallet. And she said, I don't care, you're thrown out. But this was built in the times of when Glasgow was known as Cinema City, basically. I think Glasgow had 90 picture houses at its height. And there were several around here. The Tudor was the one for Giffnock, and the Toledo in Muir End was both of them. But this probably 50s, 60s picture. And the Tudor had a capacity of over 2,000 people, and had a dance floor and a restaurant. And then down at the bottom here, where I'm put along the main road here, it had a number of shops, including a chemist. So it was way beyond its time. But I was just thinking the other day, as Cineworld announced that it's going to close down at the moment, thinking this is a bit like a deja vu here, because the reason the Tudor closed down was because everyone bought television sets. Maybe the reason that Cineworld might not open up again is because everyone's watching Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever. But I love this photograph, and it certainly reminds me of my childhood, and what it was like then. It's never quite been the same, but it's a great picture. There's another one. It's a better picture in terms of its quality. You can see that the Royal Bank was where Subway is at the moment, and the Tudor's still there, so this must be pre-1961. And then looking the other way, not the other way, looking further down Orchard Park here, you'll see here this row of shops, which has changed dramatically. The Clydesdale Bank over here, as it was, and this basically was Shepherd's and Fletcher's. Friend of mine, David Fletcher, it was his uncle, was the Fletcher. But this was basically the heart of the community, and still is in many respects. And the block of flats that Anne Craig lives in, they've been here for forever as well, over here. It's another view, but this is looking down towards William Wood Shops, and not much traffic, one car here, probably again 1950s probably. And this is Otterburn here, where my pointer is, where the Belisha Beacon is. And to my right would be Denham. And this is heading down towards the William Wood Shops, heading down this way, past the nice sandstone houses that are on my right and left here. One of the things that's a very grainy picture, one of David Blair's pictures, but obviously one of the things they had to put in when Giffnock became a community was a courthouse and a police station. And it's a rather grand building, as you know, just at the sort of top of the Giffnock Mile, as they call it. It's still there today, but nothing like as grand as it was. Now, we showed you this picture earlier on in relation to the church, but the idea here is that we get some idea of what's happened in this area. The second community, as I said, was set up around Giffnock South Church. And the houses there and the church are a bit later than in Orchard Hill. And this row of shops here, which you see now, tea rooms here, you can see it more clearly. Yeah, Fried and Sons. Was at the crossroads here, heading up to here. But again, there's no Eastwood toll at this point. There's just a crossroads between the Paisley and to Busby Road, if you like, and the Glasgow to Ayr Road. One of the things that became popular, though, was the idea of people entertaining each other in Giffnock. And there's a big tradition of Eastwood entertainers, Giffnock theatre players, etc., etc. And Orchard Hill hosted a lot of that. And Anna Blair, who wrote the book on Old Giffnock, who's now deceased, and whose these pictures have come from, is in the photograph here. That's her here. That's Anna there in the photograph. And they reckon this photograph was taken in Orchard Hill, because that's where they used the church hall in Orchard Hill to do these productions before the Memorial Halls was built. And Anna's husband, Matt Blair, who's the superintendent for the Sunday school, is also in the picture. And this is him here. So that's Matt, and that's Anna. And if you know any of the other people in the picture, that would be great. Here's another picture of them, obviously in dinner dress this time. And there's Matt again there. He's looking a bit more dapper this time. And Anna Blair, the author again, that's her there. We've talked about the old Victorian houses, but as you perhaps know, I live in Evan Drive. And Evan Drive is one of these places when they started to expand Giffnock, because Evan Drive is under the bridge here and to the right. And this picture was taken in the mid-30s, 1936, when this was built. Again, this whole area was just farmland, and later people played golf on it. But this was built by John Lawrence of Rangers fame. Lawrence built all these little bungalows, which have now, like my own, have been extended and adapted over the last 90 odd years. So basically, this was, if you like, the housing estate for Giffnock. And it's quite interesting when you talk to some of the older members of Orchard Hill who grew up in Giffnock. That's how they remember it too. It was like, well, we were in the nice houses and they were in the sort of, not quite the council houses, but they were the new people, if you like, the new estate. And I was in the new estate. And I was out the other day walking up Melford, and Dave Thompson will know this because his house is on the right-hand side here, along this road here, and Hamilton Drive, and Willie will know that well, having grown up there as well. But as you look up Melford, these are all the old houses. But where I'm standing is where it joins the new estate. So there's the last house in Hamilton, the back of it, and there's this little lane that goes along here, which has basically just been overgrown. And then if you look up further right, you're in the Lawrence estate. So if you like, that was the boundary. There was actually a wall there. And Pauline Provan was telling me, because she lived up Belford, that the people who lived in the Lawrence estate, if when they wanted to come to Orchard Hill Church, they couldn't get up Melford because there was a wall there. They had to walk the long way around because they were just cut off. So they had to go up Eastwood Main Road, walk all the way around, or walk up Otterburn. One of the other things that was happening was youth. And one of the big things was young people joining uniformed organisations after the First World War. And one of these was the Scouts. And the reason I focused in on that is because I was a member of the Scouts, the 28th Scouts, and my Scoutmaster was a famous person called Gordon Ross, who's still a member of Orchard Hill. You all know him well. And this particular building in Arthurlie was erected in 1936, as you can see. And this was a picture of them arriving at the inauguration of the building in 1936. And if you look at the back here, there's a house here, which George Robertson will recognise because it's his. So they're coming along Arthurlie Drive and to the new Scout Hall, which wasn't originally there, by the way, but it was down near Braid Bar originally. It was a hut, and they found enough money and they built this one in Arthurlie Drive. And there's another picture of them at the opening. And there's the Duke of Hamilton, as he was later on, opening Arthurlie Drive Scout hut. And the Chief Scouter, Joe Kyle, I think that's him there, or pretty sure it's him. Again, these people were all very famous in Giffnock terms. And there's a picture of it today. Not looking quite so good, but it's still there. And I just thought I'd throw this one in because that's me in the picture. It's a Scout looking a rather gawky teenager. And for those of you who are members of Orchard Hill, this guy's called Alistair Moss. He used to be a member of Orchard Hill. And I don't know if there's any other members of Orchard Hill there. This guy's Archie Montgomery, who you might know, who's also really recently joined. He's the father of the quads, known locally. But this was us. This is what we looked like as youngsters. As the years went past, the train station started to change, and all the trains, there were several different lines in Giffnock, sort of sidings, if you like, of Giffnock Station, which went to the back of Braid Bar where Giffnock North is and up to the Quarries. And in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they started to basically get rid of these old lines. And you can see there's one of the old lines there coming off the main line. And these have now all been taken up because they would no longer need to transport all the quarrying away, and they changed. And Giffnock was becoming more of a commuter place for Glasgow, and this would be in the 60s and 70s of particularly when youngsters were going to the independent schools in Glasgow. You'll see, for example, that this chap here's got a Glasgow High School badge on, and this guy here's got a Hutchie badge on. You see youngsters coming back off the train. And this chap here is David Blair himself, Anna Blair's son, who gave me the pictures. And this is the porter, who I think his name was Huey, and he only had one eye, and then wore a patch and was evidently the life and soul of the station. A very popular guy, look after all the passengers. Orchard Hill was changing too, and in the 1960s, after both wars, one of the things they tried to do was to talk about how people could be assimilated again after being in the war, and obviously a lot of them like my father went out and played golf all day when he finished work. Some went to play bowling, but some wanted to be involved in the theatre and all these other recreations, or go to the cinema. And Orchard Hill's contribution to that was to build the memorial halls. And this is a picture of the laying of the foundation stone at Orchard Hill Memorial Halls. And this is a picture of Hamish Mackenzie, the Minister of Orchard Hill. And I don't know who this woman is. She looks a bit like the Queen, but I don't think it certainly isn't. But that was in the early 60s. And it was part of, that's why they're called the Memorial Halls, because they're dedicated to those who died in the First World War and the Second World War in particular, and people from Giffnock. And the idea was to provide social activities for the people of Giffnock, because the Tudor would have been knocked down just about at the same time. And that's then an early picture of the memorial halls, looking quite dapper at that point. And does anyone remember the guide hut, which is basically where Isabel's house is? I do, because I went to nursery there. The guide hut, this hut here, which is at the back of where Isabel's house is, had several iterations. It was used by Dad's army basically during the Second World War. It's been used by Eastwood Theatre players. It's been as a store for all their equipment before they moved down onto Kilmarnock Road. But in my day, in the early 50s, it was a nursery. And it was the guide hut. It was where the guides met before they met in the memorial halls. And this is a picture of it being torn down. And that's what they replaced it with. Isabel's house on the left, and this house here, both were built, it was obviously built by Orchard Hill, and this one was sold off, and this was kept as the church officer's house. In Giffnock also there's been a long tradition of other religions, and clearly the Jewish religion was very important in my day. When I was in primary school, there was well, at least half a dozen people of the Jewish faith in my primary class. And in the 60s, they built the synagogue at the back of the Orchard Park there. And also, you can see it off the Kilmarnock Road. And it was acclaimed as being one of the nicest synagogues in Europe. I've been in the halls, but I actually haven't been in the actual sanctuary, if that's the right word, which it isn't. And of course, this is one of the earlier parts before they actually built the synagogue, when they set up the Maccabi Centre, the youth centre, which has now been rebuilt as well as Jewish Care and the Maccabi. And of course, the Congregational Church. And eventually Park Church. This is a picture of, obviously, a mosque. There isn't a mosque in Giffnock or a Catholic church in Giffnock. So the nearest mosque is in Glasgow, as you know. That's a picture of Ingle, where Ingle would have been the original school, if you like, on this site. It's now just a modern house with a cottage, but according to the history books, I think the original cottage was there. And of course, the Redhurst has been redeveloped at the moment. Just throw in some old pictures of Giffnock. So here's the Clydesdale Bank, which is now, what's it called again? You'll remember, we'll remember, Sava. And this is Fletcher's, or Shepherd's as it was beforehand, which was basically the shop in Giffnock, and the post office over here. It wasn't, but the post office used to be in Fletcher's and Shepherd's. And the Tudor has gone through many different iterations. It was the Tudor, then it became Galbraith's, or it became Presto Galbraith's. I can't remember which order this is in. Whole Foods, Lidl's. It's gone through a number of different iterations, but nearly always as a supermarket. And there's an old picture of the other side, of the side where Bramble is, the old bus stops. These are a bit grainy, these pictures. The more motor cars came in, the more petrol stations were there. This was the Esso petrol station where Harry Fairbairn is now, just next to the Congregational Church. Braidbar Motor Company. And where Quickfit is, Cameron Campbell were one of the occupants. There were others in the 60s. And a wee bit more up to date, the McDonald Hotel. which of course was part of my upbringing in the 70s and 80s. It's actually where I met Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay as he was called at that time. He was actually staying at the McDonald Hotel. My brother and I went round and got his autograph outside the McDonald Hotel. Then of course they knocked it down and built flats on it. But that's what it used to look like. It's quite a nice hotel. The shops in Giffnock have always been a feature. And these are the Maverton buildings. And it's quite an interesting history because these shops have all changed dramatically. The Cooper's on the right-hand side here, I remember well. Valentini's has remained a constant, the ice cream shop. But these shops like Monroe's, etc., have off sales up here, which is now Panavino. These have all changed. But the history is that the Maverton buildings originally were the hall where everyone used to come and socialise in the early 1900s. So these shops and flats didn't exist. There was a hall down beneath it. So if you go round the back of the Orchard Park, what you'll find now is there's now basically basements for the shops. But it was a hall where in the early 1900s, all the socialising took place in Giffnock. And then they built the shops and the flats on top of the hall. And then they closed the halls down. So in the early 1900s, when you saw these other events that were going on in Giffnock, such as the fetes, etc., the bowling, the place where people met was underneath these shops in a hall underneath here of the Maverton buildings. And there's another view of the shops later on. That'll be about the 70s or 80s, and Oddbins is there, Man's World. Big turnover of shops. So again, underneath the buildings, if you can imagine, the Maverton buildings. This is a very grainy picture, but when the quarries beside Huntley Park were there, they eventually stopped. They had cranes and diggers in for ages and ages. And eventually they sort of flattened everything. And if you can look over here, you'll see a green bit. That's the Huntley playing fields there. And that's the road up sort of Evan Drive that goes over to the top of my house. And this is basically what they did. They just sort of flattened it on top of all the quarries. Now, as you know, this has been a bone of contention for many years because underneath here, and particularly over to the side, the back of Forres Avenue, are these huge caverns and unstable areas where all the quarries used to be. Now, when I was a kid, I used to come over, because I lived in Devon Avenue, which is over here, and I used to come through a lane here and play football here in Huntley and on the hockey pitch when the parky wasn't looking. But when we wanted to have fun, we would come in here into what was at the time Quarries. There was huge lakes here and up to Braid Bar Farm. And we'd even play in the cranes when the workmen went home. That would be in the late 50s, 60s. And essentially this was when they filled it all in. And as you know, that now is now grass and fenced off areas. And you can now walk your dog from Huntley Park here all the way through to Braid Bar and out to sort of Giffnock North. And this is the area that people are talking about building 400 houses on. So far, we don't know what's going to happen with that, but East Renfrewshire Council has often said that the only way to sort this out is to build something there so they can pay for filling in the quarries. And here's an old picture of Huntley Park, and you can see the old rugby pitch here. This is still here, obviously, the pavilion, and you can see the old rugby posts here because people played rugby here, and Giffnock North played on the football pitches. I remember when I was a youngster, my mother made me a Giffnock North scarf, and we could go and watch Giffnock North, and we watched them here on the football pitches further down while the rugby was going on up here. And that's an old picture from the 1940s, I think that was, when they were having events at Huntley Park, because behind here this is just the bit that goes up to the clubhouse, not the clubhouse, the changing rooms. and these were fundraising British Legion events, etc. An old picture of Giffnock North when I was young again, before Giffnock North was developed. They had these ash pitches, and these are rather primitive floodlights. And I remember playing football on that many a time. We thought it was wonderful because they actually had these floodlights. But you can see a very primitive sort of clubhouse, and that has been modernised over recent years. An early picture of Eastwood Toll. You can see the McDonald's Hotel to your right here, where the new flats are, and Eastwood Toll before they put any flowers on it, and some of the older cars. That's a Hillman, is it? And that was the station master's house. I talked about them before, and it was knocked down to make way for the library, and the train station started to go through a number of changes, and this is what it used to look like. And you can see that there's two bridges here. There's only one now. That's the only bridge that exists now. And there was another bridge because the siding, you'll see that the train track comes off here and goes along the back, because that was the siding that went into Braid Bar Quarries and round the back through May Terrace. And the railway line went all the way up through there, up into the quarry area. If you look from the other angle, this is them taking down, modernising the building. And you can see, if you look the other way, you'll see that here's the signal box that used to exist. And that's the courthouse over there at the back. You can see the signals. There's a better picture. Looking upwards towards the courthouse again, with the old signal box. And there's Huey with David Blair. A number of coal merchants used to be down there as well. Some old coal merchants, like Kennedy's, that had been there for ages. Although there was a lot of coal mining in Giffnock, the coal was of poor quality, so they didn't actually sell it commercially to households. But the coal merchants here would ship the coal out, sort of industrial grade coal, and bring in proper coal. And when I was younger, I remember the coalman arriving with the bags of coal, as some of you will do, and dropping them off at the house. The Royal Bank, old picture of the Royal Bank, hasn't changed very much. One of the last things that we will remember was in 1971, wasn't in Giffnock, but it was the Clarkson disaster. I was working in London at the time, and I remember seeing something in the news, and I tried to phone home to see if everyone was okay, and it took me about 3 hours before I got through. So that was in October 1971, where 21 people were killed, a lot of people are injured. Was probably the biggest disaster in the sort of East Renfrewshire area that I've known. A friend of mine had their ankle blown off, but survived. So, another couple of pictures, just lastly to finish up. That's again looking down where there is now extra building being put on, extra flats, I've forgotten the name of them. And Pelosi's ice cream and cafe used to be opposite the Tudor. It was famous. And Braid Bar Nurseries. So there's lots more I could probably show you, but I think I'll leave it at that and ask if anyone has got any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gary. If anyone does have any questions, just take your mic off mute and shout out.
That was great, Gary. I didn't grow up in Giffnock, so I've learned a lot tonight, but some of it I do remember.
Thanks, Jeanette. I'm sorry it was a bit bitty, but
Oh
I've
no,
had
it was.
I've had an eye. I got an eye operation a couple of weeks ago, and
I heard
I
that.
found it a wee bit difficult to just string things together. I was taking a bit more time to do it, but there's so much I think to talk about in Giffnock. You need to sort of focus in on one or two things. Hopefully you've got an idea that there's lots of stuff to find out. The East Renfrewshire Heritage Service has a lot of really great information in Giffnock if you're interested.
Yeah.
And Anna Blair's book, Old Giffnock, is fantastic. I don't know it's still being published. I tried to get an extra copy, but couldn't get one off Amazon or anything else. It doesn't seem to be published anymore. It's great. And then, of course, Orchard Hill. She also wrote the history of Orchard Hill as well, which is great as well.
Yeah.
That was brilliant, Gary. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You're welcome, Sheila.
Really enjoyed that.
Good.
Well, I think, as you all know, we've recorded this session tonight because a few people said they wanted to come along but couldn't. So please let people know if you thought it was good and worthwhile. They can get it online somewhere. I think that we'll let people know how to get access to it. I'm also, thank you, Gary, again. It's now given me some places to go and walk to with the dog. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to head off down to the Redhurst and look out for the Inglebrook Cottage. And I'm also going to astound my wife with the amazing fact that Gordon Brown was born in the Orchard Park Hotel. So,
Gary.
Yes, Jeanette.
Did you find out from David, did Anna not go to that early school before it moved to the Orchard Hill Church for a school? Yeah. She spoke as if she went to somewhere small off Eastwood Mains Road.
Is that right? I don't think so because
Anna was at primary school. She's actually got a great deal in her book. Old Giffnock. And if you look into Morrison's, you'll still see photographs. And one of the favourite photographs that Gary just showed is still available in Morrison's on the right-hand side as you go along past the kiosk.
Yeah.
You go into Morrison's.
Yeah. Jonah was saying something about that, yeah.
Can I just say, Gary, can you?
Yes, Anne, sorry.
The lady beside Mr. Mackenzie was Mrs. Mackenzie.
Oh, was it? He looks very regal. That sorts out. Yeah, well, that's all. I should have thought of that.
Thanks very much, Gary. That was so interesting.
Yes, it was fantastic. Thank you.
Well done.
Maybe later about it. There's several things I noticed. So thanks a lot for doing that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I can't vouch for the authenticity of all my statements, but I hope at least it gave you some food for thought.
How are you doing now, Gary? How do you feel now?
Well, a lot better, thanks, Jeanette.
Yes, I heard about it. It was quite something.
I've still got a gas bubble in my eye, but apart from that, once it goes away, I should be a lot better. So
yes,
yeah. I feel a bit like Huey at Giffnock. I feel as though I should have a patch over my right hand.
Yes, the bubble could be annoying.
It can be.
It goes.
Yeah, but I'm delighted that someone did it so quickly. A great big thanks to the NHS for acting so quickly.
Oh, I know.
Even though it was on my 70th birthday, which wasn't quite what I'd planned.
Hope you made up for it later.
Yeah, we'll do our best. We'll do our best. Thank you.
Must go now and shut my curtains. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
Bye, bye, Janet.
And bye-bye. And
Yes.
before everyone else signs off, just a reminder that next week George Webb is talking about the refurbishment at Kelvin Grove. So another bit of local history, and a lovely building there. George Webb's going to be talking about that. So please feel free to sign in next week and listen up. But thank you. I'm going to head off now as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Gareth, for hosting.
Thanks,
Bye.
Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night, folks.
Bye.
Yes, thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you.
No
See
problem.
you
Thanks a
later,
lot for coming.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, I'm going to sign off. Bye, everyone.